The 40-second signal went dark at the third hour of my watch, and I sat with my hands flat on the console and did not move for a long time. I am Rithavik Psalm. I have held the senior cartographer's seat in the chart sanctum of the Veth Conclave for 31 years. I have redrawn borders after plagues, after collapses, after wars that consumed entire transit corridors. I have marked sectors interdicted, contested, approach with caution. I have sealed survey logs in the 2-key cabinet and written marginal notes in the formal register and gone home and slept. That is the work. That has always been the work. I did not sleep after the night I am describing to you now. The Drevosi fleet entered the dark border sector at the 19th hour of the previous watch. 42 warships, the Drevosi 1st Expeditionary, their finest formation, the one they had spent 11 years assembling after 3 failed border probes by smaller survey vessels, had returned with no data at all, only structural damage the Drevosi engineers could not account for. 42. Their fleet command had been very proud of that number. I had been present 2 months prior when their senior admiral briefed the Conclave's Outer Sector Committee. He used the word decisive 4 times. He used the word conclusive twice. He said the dark border sector, the region every chart in the sanctum labeled simply as human space, unverified boundary, had been allowed to remain a mystery for too long, and that mystery was a liability, and that the Drevosi 1st Expeditionary would resolve it. No one on the committee told him not to go. I should say clearly that I did not warn him. The Conclave's formal position on human space has been, for the length of my career and for the length of my predecessor's career, and for the length of her predecessor's career before that, studied neutrality. We chart what is known. We label what is unknown. We do not speculate in the formal register about what lies behind the boundary, because speculation about that particular boundary has a history of producing exactly the kind of instability the Conclave exists to prevent. There are 3 entries in the sealed archive, from 3 separate centuries, documenting what happens to committees and councils and advisory bodies that begin formally speculating about human space. They are sealed for good reason. I have read one of them. I did not read the other 2. So I did not warn Admiral Veth Sorek. The committee did not warn him, and 42 warships crossed the unverified boundary at the 19th hour and began their approach into the dark. I had the telemetry feed open on my secondary console. I want to be precise about what that feed showed me, because the formal record I filed the following morning is, by necessity, incomplete. The formal record says, survey contact lost with Drevosi 1st Expeditionary Formation, designation DREX-1, 42 vessels, following boundary crossing at coordinate set 7th 8 NAS. No distress signals received. No debris field confirmed at boundary. Sector redesignated. See Sealed Archive, Cabinet 7, Key Access. Senior Cartographer and Conclave First Chair only. That is what the formal record says. It is accurate, it is not complete. What the telemetry feed showed me in the first hour after crossing was unremarkable. Formation intact, velocity steady. The 42 signatures moving in the pattern their fleet command had briefed, a broad sweep, sensor arrays wide, the kind of methodical advance a formation uses when it expects to find nothing and wants to document the nothing carefully. The dark border sector is, by every passive observation we have ever made from outside it, genuinely dark. No beacon traffic. No transit lanes. No colony signatures. No industrial emissions. No communication bands carrying anything we can decode. From outside the boundary, it reads as empty. I have noted in my private log, not the formal register, my private log, which I keep in longhand in a bound ledger that no one else will read, that empty and quiet are not the same thing, and that every species in the Conclave's recorded history that has confused the two has subsequently required the Conclave to update its membership roster. The first signal dropped at the second hour, not a distress, not a combat indicator. The signature simply ceased as if the vessel had been switched off. I ran the diagnostic twice. The feed was clean. The vessel was gone. then the second. Then, over the following 40 minutes, 7 more, in no pattern I could identify, not a line, not a flanking sweep, not the kind of sequential loss you see when a formation is being worked from one end to the other by an opposing force. Random, or what looked random. I am a cartographer, not a tactician, and I will not pretend to know the difference between randomness and a pattern I lack the framework to read. By the second hour and a half, 19 signatures remained. They had stopped their sweep. They were holding position deep inside the boundary, well past the point of quick return. I noted this in the feed log. I did not contact the Conclave duty officer. I do not know, even now, whether that was the right decision. I know it was the decision I made. At the second hour and 50 minutes, one of the 19 remaining vessels opened a wideband channel. Not a directed transmission wideband, the kind of signal you send when you want anything listening to hear you. I have the transcript in the sealed cabinet. I will not reproduce it here in full. I will say that what the channel carried was not a report of engagement. There was no description of an opposing force, no damage assessment, no position of enemy vessels. What the channel carried, for the 11 seconds it was open, was a description of something the transmitting crew could see through their forward observation array. I have thought in the years since about whether to describe what they described. I have decided again not to. The channel closed. Over the next 22 minutes, the remaining 18 signatures went dark, one by one, at intervals that were almost not quite, but almost regular, as if something was being methodical, as if something had time. The 40-second signal went dark at the third hour of my watch. I sat with my hands flat on the console. The feed showed me an empty coordinate field, no wreckage indicators, no residual drive signatures, no emergency beacons. 42 warships, 11 years in assembly, the finest formation the Drevosi had ever put together, and the sector had simply received them and gone quiet again. I pulled up the master chart for the outer border region. The dark sector had carried its label for so long that the label's ink, in the original manuscript chart kept under glass in the sanctum's preservation vault, has faded to near invisibility. Someone wrote human space. Unverified boundary in the margin of that chart a very long time ago, and subsequent cartographers had simply carried the notation forward, addition to addition, because there was nothing to add and nothing to remove. I added something. I worked by hand. That is not standard procedure. The formal registry system accepts digital entry, and digital entry is what the record requires. But I worked by hand first in my private ledger because I needed to understand what I was writing before I committed it to the formal register. I drew the boundary line 3 degrees further out than its previous position. The dark sector had, in the space of one night, become demonstrably larger, not because anything had moved, but because the boundary of what the conclave could responsibly claim was safe to approach had contracted, and it was my job to reflect that contraction accurately. I labeled the adjusted region, unnamed/approach prohibited. I wrote one note in the margin, in the small formal script the sanctum uses for marginal annotations. I have written hundreds of marginal notes in 31 years. Most of them are administrative, cross-references, dating corrections, notations about superseded surveys. This one was different. I will tell you what it said, because it is the only part of that night's work that I believe the formal register should have contained and did not. It said, the sector does not appear to have been defended. It appears to have been inhabited. I sealed the telemetry transcript in Cabinet 7. I logged the key access requirement. I filed the formal redesignation. I closed the feed on my secondary console, which had been showing me an empty coordinate field for the better part of an hour, and which I saw no reason to continue watching. Then I sat in the chart sanctum for a while longer in the dark, because the sanctum's overhead lights are on a proximity sensor, and I had not moved enough to trigger them, and I found I did not particularly want to. There is a thing the conclave does not say officially, and that every senior cartographer understands unofficially, which is that the boundary around human space has never, in the recorded history of the Conclave's chart registry, moved outward. Every other contested or interdicted region in the registry has, at some point, expanded or contracted based on new survey data, negotiated borders, changes in the underlying situation. Human space has only ever contracted. The boundary has only ever been redrawn to be larger, to give more room, to mark more of the surrounding approach lanes as inadvisable. The oldest chart in the preservation vault, the one whose ink is nearly invisible, marks a boundary considerably smaller than the one I redrew that night. I have never found a record of who first drew the original line, or what they saw before they drew it. The archive entry that would contain that information is one of the two sealed ones I chose not to read. I made that choice 31 years ago when I first took the senior cartographer's seat and the Conclave's first chair at the time, a woman named Verath Osek, who held the chair for 40 years and who I respected more than anyone I have ever worked with, told me that the choice to not read those entries was the wisest professional decision I would ever make. She said it without irony. I believed her then. I believe her more now. The Drevosi sent a diplomatic inquiry to the Conclave 6 weeks after the night I have described. They asked for any survey data the Conclave held regarding the disappearance of their first expeditionary formation. I filed a formal response on behalf of the Sanctum. The Conclave held no survey data pertaining to events inside the unnamed/approach prohibited designation, as no Conclave survey vessel had operated inside that designation, and the Conclave was not in a position to speculate about events in regions it had not surveyed. I noted that the Conclave's current charts reflected the boundary as adjusted, and that the adjustment was available for download through the standard registry feed. The Drevosi did not send a follow-up inquiry. They updated their own charts within the month. I noted, without comment in my private ledger, that they had moved their boundary markers even further out than I had recommended. That is the thing about this particular border, the thing I have come to understand across 31 years of sitting in this sanctum and watching other species approach it and reconsider. No one who has ever gotten close enough to gather real information about what lies behind it has subsequently argued for a closer look. The argument for a closer look is always made by the ones who haven't been close yet. After they get close, the ones who come back, which is not all of them, and which was none of them that night, they do not make the argument anymore. The chart on my wall shows the current boundary. It is accurate. It is, like all boundaries around human space, probably temporary, not because the situation will change, but because the next time someone crosses it, the line will move again, further out, and I or whoever holds this seat after me will redraw it again, in the same careful hand, and write the same designation in the same formal script. Unnamed, approach prohibited. The sector does not need a name. Names are for places you intend to return to.